Grief, what a huge packet.
Good evening and welcome to the June 30th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Tonight we're going to do a public hearing on the proposed Central Issaquah Development and Design Standards Amendment with an S. But first of all, I wasn't here the last time, so I didn't get a chance to welcome the new members to the commission, so welcome.
Thank you.
I did read the minutes, and I was really impressed with everybody's comments. Normally, it takes several meetings to get adjusted to what exactly we're looking at. I think the comments that were there by the new members I thought were kind of awesome. You just got really into it and started working on it. So thank you for that. The first thing on our agenda is approval of the minutes of that meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make such a motion.
Second it.
Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the minutes as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So with that, we're going to ask Lucy and Kristen to give us an update on what the proposed changes are to the amendments.
Hello, I'm Kristen Leeson. I'm a senior planner with the Development Services Department, for those of you I have not met. I'm going to start it off, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lucy. There are 4 amendments that we're talking about tonight. Well, let me do this part first. There are 4 amendments. It'll be an open hearing, so we'll have the open meeting for public comment in a little bit, and then a PPC discussion and recommendation. The amendments are to clarify the affordable housing provision in the density bonus program, to clarify minimum plant size and spacing, clarify options to address building mass and design, and establish the size and location criteria for motorcycle parking spaces. So first up, we have clarify affordable housing provision in the density bonus program. So this came up, the density bonus program is a way to provide economic value for developers by allowing them additional square footage through either building height or floor area ratio in exchange for public benefits, which would be, in this case, affordable housing and open space. So you say, here's your base height, here's where you can build. If you want to go over that, that's great, but you're going to give us something in return. So the amendment was requested because since this has been adopted, there's been confusion among applicants and staff alike about how to calculate the bonus area and the requirements associated with that. So in conversations with the city attorney and staff, a few other things were added to the amendment. The first one is change the word bonus density to bonus development. This came up in a discussion with our city attorney, and it came up because we said, what if an applicant, and this happens, what if an applicant doesn't want to add an entire floor of usable space? They only want to add about 2 or 3 feet. And this may come up because, say, an applicant wants to put a penthouse on the top, and they can get, with really high ceilings, and they can get more money for that than they can for a 10-foot ceiling. So it's come up before, and the developer and the city attorney said, well, they're not actually adding density. That's a development bonus, not a density bonus, so you can't get anything from them if you call it density bonus. So for that reason, we have gone through the entire Central Issaquah standards, and we are proposing to change the word density to development so that no matter how high they go above the height or how far they go over the FAR, we still get public benefit for going over that base that they're allowed to do. Another one, the second one, is to include exemptions. So throughout the land use code, there are certain things that are exempt from building heights, such as mechanical equipment, required elevator shafts, cell towers, chimneys, flagpoles. That kind of thing is exempt from building height, so there was no reason not to exempt it from this as well. The other one that we exempted are public schools and school facilities because they already add a public benefit. They are a public benefit to the city, so it kind of felt like double dipping if we required that from them. This is the one that initiated the conversation, this chart, which is supposed to tell us how to calculate the requirement from the developer. So what we did, the most confusing part for people seemed to be first of all, the left half of the table was for 1/3, the first 1/3 of the bonus density development, and the right half was for 2/3. And another confusing point, so we clarified that, and just, by adding 1/3 and 2/3 to each side, and in the text in the body of the table. And then also there was the confusion came from this column A2, which is called portion. That seemed to be a point of confusion for people as well, so we eliminated that piece. And lastly, the last amendment here has to do with what do you use? If it's common that builders will go over both the FAR and the building height, and people said, do you use both of those? Do you use one of those? If you use one, which do you use? So we said calculate it all, and whichever one comes out to be greater, the floor height or the building height or the floor area ratio, that is the one that you use. So those are the 4 amendments, proposed amendments regarding bonus development, and I will hand it over to Lucy. Are we doing questions now? Are we doing public comment now, or how do you want to do that tonight?
I thought you'd go through your whole presentation, and then we could do public comment.
Okay.
I do have one question on 5.4, though, on that section B. Is there a reason why we're not, if they're going over building height and exceeding the base, is there a reason we're not putting those together instead of just using the largest of the two?
Now, Lucy may have to step in, but I think it's because they're not totally separate entities. So by going over the building height, you may also at the same time unintentionally go over the FAR. And can you explain it better?
Well, I think actually Kristen hit on it. That by exceeding in one category or the other, if you think of it as like a volume, it's the same volume going over. That's why we picked the greater of them, because they're not two separate sets of, I'm not doing a good job. They're not two separate sets of volume, they're overlapping, and therefore to count them both twice, would be counting it twice. Does that make sense?
As much as it can, yeah.
Okay. That's
Okay.
kind of you, thank you.
I had a question about the fee. I noticed, I can't remember where it was, but I noticed that it was saying that it was exempt from development agreements. So it mentions $15. I was curious how this compares to the fee that is normally in development agreements. Is this higher or lower? And then I'm questioned about that is then how staff determined that it should be higher or lower than we generally set in our development agreements.
Well, do the development agreements do bonus
So
density? They don't.
So I don't know.
There's a line item that specifically mentions that.
So I think what it's saying is that projects that are in areas covered by development agreements are exempt from density bonus, because there's been some they have separate regulations and negotiations. And so in some cases, for instance, Costco is in the central Issaquah area. They have a development agreement, and they are paying quite a bit of money. I don't want.
How does that break down per square foot?
I couldn't possibly tell you off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
How did you guys come up, let's direct it to the 15 then. How did you guys come up with this amount?
That was the market rate at that time. I can't tell you how they came up with it. We didn't write it, but they went through
Should there be
different
language
scenarios.
that then changes it based on the market rate? Because from a little bit of research that I did, that seemed a little low. And I was just curious why. And
Yeah,
if
and
there's
that's-
reason for it, that's great, but I wanted to know what that was.
That's come up a few times. It's been asked a few times, and I would have the same question myself because we didn't write this portion. So I think right now, I think we'll keep that there, put it in the parking lot, and we're doing a housing strategy, and this whole thing is going to be revisited.
Okay.
So I would imagine that we would address that then and say, is 15 what we want to keep? Do we want to adjust that based on the market rate? How does that work? So I agree that that's something that's come up before, and I don't have the answer, but we can always relook at it. Yeah.
Going back to 5.4, I was just looking at the definitions of floor area ratio and then the height. So I'm thinking of the situation in which you've got, I don't know, some portion of a floor cordoned off for whatever reason. They just decide they're going to use it for storage. It's not going to be available for units. But they've also added height to it. So it's not being used for either. I mean, that would be a situation conceivably where you're both exceeding the FAR and the height requirements at the same time. I mean, I think there can be situations where that would arise.
Oh,
Right, and that's why we put that in there, because there are situations where that can arise. And that's why we said you calculate it both ways. You calculate the building height that's exceeding it, and then you would count the FAR that's exceeding it.
But then you're only taking one
And then you're only
instead of
taking the
both.
greatest number of those two, so that you're not double dipping and using both.
Not the greatest number of those two, the one that is greater.
Results in the greatest benefit to the city. Yes, thank you.
I don't know, it seems like if you're exceeding both, I mean, you should be charged for both. I mean, to the extent that there is not overlap. Because there will be some overlap, and I don't know how you'd necessarily calculate that. I mean, but it should be a simple, calculation.
I am
don't
not
know.
good enough at numbers to figure
So
that out.
so I guess here's the thing, and maybe I'm just not, you and I each probably have a picture in our head. I cannot imagine a way where the greater number does not include the lesser number. So if, for instance, the square footage that exceeds for height is 10,000 square feet, and the square footage that exceeds for FAR is 5,000 square feet, I cannot imagine a way in which that 5,000 square feet is not within the 10,000 square feet. And
I guess that's my confusion, is how do you have a square footage measured on blank height?
Okay, so that's a great question. So if, it kind of goes back to the point that Kristen made. If the height limit is 50 feet, and in some cases it is, and your building is 52 feet, you would just take that slice at the 50-foot level, whatever that floor plate is, and that would be so if that floor plate is 2,000 square feet, that would be what the number that you would use, the square footage you would use to calculate what their fee or their open space or whatever was, that would be the number you would use to calculate.
Okay.
Right.
And that makes, okay, now that makes sense.
Okay.
Anything else?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Help me understand, when you say we're going to be exceeding base height, and does that mean that we're going to have, if a developer wants to come in and say, I want 12-foot ceilings, I want 14-foot ceilings, whatever, and it causes each floor to eventually stack up, could that actually, in theory, create perception from the outside, a second story or another floor? So you're actually raising it that much of a difference.
This isn't done on stories or floors. This is actually done on height. So it would go above. There's a difference between counting the number of stories, because you're right, you could have a 10-foot story or you could have a 15-foot story. So if you do stories, they could be allowed to have 5 stories, and that, oh shoot, now I have to do math. That could either go up to, 75 feet, or it could go up to 50 feet if you have 5 stories, depending. But if you do it just based on height alone, just based on the number of feet included in that building, yes, absolutely, that could get it over the base height. Does that make sense?
So the way this is currently worded could actually allow a developer to exceed base height as from 50 to maybe 75 because of the formula that we have here.
And only by giving us public benefit in return. So they're required to give us either affordable housing through that, because of that height, and/or open space. So they don't just get it.
And that open space and/or affordable housing would not necessarily be connected to that specific development. So they could actually create a development elsewhere for affordable housing or create open space in another area.
If they are doing a development that includes residential components, so it's either all residential or mixed use, which includes residential, so retail on the bottom and residential on the top. They do affordable housing, that must be included within that development. So some of their units must be affordable. If they're doing a commercial development or non-residential development, then whatever they exceed, they pay right now $15 per square foot of whatever their bonus area is, and that goes into a fund, and council then determines whether that goes towards open space or affordable housing, which does not have to be on site.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, thank you for the clarification, that's excellent.
you're welcome.
Continue.
Good? Okay.
Jennifer's actually doing the next one.
I was going to say, I wasn't mentioned, but I'm going to do the next one. My name is Jennifer R. Woods. There's another Jennifer Woods, so the R is important. I'm an associate planner with Development Services, and I'm going to talk to you about the next amendment, which is to clarify the minimum plant size and spacing. So the reason for the amendment is that it revises a current flexible standard that we have in the code today that allows an applicant to basically manipulate the plant sizes required or the spacing required with a letter from a landscape architect explaining what the justification for doing that would be. That's it. That particular standard has kind of been misused, so we're revising it to kind of put a bigger eye on exactly what they're requesting and a better justification on why. The amendment also includes the requirement to have a peer review conducted at the applicant's expense, so that we have an expert looking at what that landscape architect is proposing. And that's it.
How did you come up with 85% growth?
That, way back when it was decided, I have no idea, but it's been that way for a very long time.
So 85% is just what we require they show the plants on the plans so that we can ensure that they're using the spacing, the appropriate spacing of the plants, and we're not going to end up with either big gaps between plants when they're at their maturity, or that they are so close that they would damage each other. So we sometimes see that some developers want to not pay a lot of money, and so they use big symbols. Sometimes we see that some developers want things to look very full at planting, and they will not grow in well. They will not be, the plants will not maintain health because there's not enough room for branches and stuff to reach maturity. So what we're asking is that they show their plants at 85% so that staff is able to review the plans and make sure that they're well spaced for the health.
Is that how it's stated in
The code today?
85% in the plans? I just read that they were required to put in plants that were 85% of their growth.
Yeah, so it says the plan shall indicate plants at 85% of mature size. And basically what Lucy was saying is when they create their plans and they give them to us for review, the plans need to mimic what it's going to look like on site once the plants have filled out 85% of their maturity. So
I understand
Right,
that, and
right.
now it's just in the plans.
yeah,
It's
just
not-
in the plans.
They don't
right.
have to plant a tree that's 85% of it.
No,
I mean, that
no.
would be big.
I do have one additional question just on 1017 generally. Has there been any looking at the other standards in terms of utilization of low water plants or native plants, and is that already included?
Yes, the chapter 10, which is the landscape development standards chapter, actually has specific requirements for how much native you use. So there, and drought tolerant plants as well. So there's several sections actually throughout the entire set of standards, but this is the specific one about landscaping that required those kinds of things.
Here's a question from Connie Marsh. She had pointed out that on number 2, plans shall indicate plants of 85% of maturity size. Number 3, all planting areas shall contain landscaping or installed based on an approved plan and appropriately spaced to provide total coverage of the landscape within 3 years. She had mentioned that while this is not a change, these two seem to contradict each other. It is not possible to have coverage within 3 years if plants don't mature, whatever that means for 80 years. So what if you have a very slow growing plant? And who selects who who will actually approve the plans? Do we have someone that's on site that will say, these are the appropriate plans to use, or these are not the appropriate plans?
So typically the plans are drawn up by a landscape architect that we review in our office. And they're kind of two separate, I would say they're kind of two separate intents there. The 85% maturity piece, the first part that you read off, is really to make sure, like Lucy was saying, that the plants are spaced appropriately, that they're using enough plants, and that they're gonna basically maintain the landscaping profile that they're showing on the plans, which is a picture. It's not what's gonna happen in real life. So the other part of that, which is the next one, which has to do with what they look like in 3 years, is seeing how the picture fulfills itself in real life. And so we do an inspection. There's a whole process, a maintenance period they go through, and we'll go out and do a maintenance inspection to make sure that these things look the way that they were supposed to on the plans. And part of that is making sure that ground cover achieves its coverage, that the shrubs are alive and doing well and filling out, and things aren't overcrowded.
Okay, so what you're saying is, after the landscape architect and the gardeners come in and do the plantings, we have an inspection at that time to evaluate the plants to make sure that they are specified in the plans? Or what you're saying is in 3 years, we send out another inspection crew to go out and evaluate the landscaping?
So there's both. We do a performance inspection and a maintenance inspection 3 years after the installation has occurred.
Okay.
The performance inspection is just to make sure things are in the place that they're supposed to be per the plans.
Okay. And if they are not, they don't meet the conformity standards, how is that enforced?
Through something that we call a punch list. And a punch list is a technical term that we use that basically is a list of to-dos before we'll sign off on your permit and let you begin your maintenance period. And typically at the beginning of the maintenance period, we collect a maintenance bond. So that's our security to ensure that after we say, okay, you've done everything per the plans, we're good to go. If you have punch list items, you've finished all your punch list items, then you can move into maintenance. We need your bond. There's a certain calculation that we take in for the bond, a certain amount of funds associated with that bond. And then we go through the maintenance period, and at the end of 3 years, we basically repeat the process before we release that bond. But the bond is there as a security mechanism to make sure things are done and stay the way that they're supposed to in the plans.
Okay, excellent. And how has that worked for us so far?
It seems to be working good. To my knowledge, we've never had to collect on a bond.
Okay.
I do have a question, but I want to first address, I don't have a copy of these public comments. Were they distributed by staff or?
No, Connie Marsh had given it to me.
I'm sure that Connie will make her statement at the public hearing since she's here.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
Yeah, so since this is talking about standards that affect the Development Commission's review of the amendments, I would certainly invite the two people from the Development Commission to come up here and join us, if you would so care to, or not.
Appreciate the invitation. Will we be able to ask questions of staff?
Yes.
To the public?
Yeah, you would be considered part of planning policy. I know, I saw you writing things down there to ask questions, and you might as well ask them now while we're discussing it than waiting till the end.
We
So
get paid double?
triple what I get.
Jennifer, my question is about the peer review. I'm curious, you guys mentioned that you don't have a landscape architect on staff. It sounds like this is kind of something that we tend to use a lot. I'm curious why someone doesn't pull double duty in this area and why the staff has chosen to maybe not have a resource that someone who maybe is qualified to do this. Why the peer review? I'm curious why we've chosen to go this route. It's pretty predominant through the standard. We keep referring back to the peer review. Why have we made that choice to go with that option?
So there are quite a few things where staff have just enough knowledge to probably get ourselves in trouble. So, geotechnical review, wetland biologists, certain kinds of road design. We just don't have enough experience and frequent enough experience. We do have one person who's trained as a landscape architect on staff. I don't think he has the bandwidth to be doing that, or, to maintain sort of staying up with the literature and all the new plants that come on the market to be able to do that. And so we would, I would assume we would advertise and identify a landscape architect who would provide those services for us. We would have a contract with them. Applicants would be required to reimburse the city for that peer review. We did that when the major development review team in the urban villages for many years. We had a landscape architect who provided those services to the MDRT in that same kind of setting.
Does the city have resources to open a position to be able to fulfill this? I realize that we have to reword this, but it sounds like there's the need. I'm curious why.
Do you mean to put someone on
staff?
staff?
Yeah,
That would be a council decision, budgetary decision.
I see.
And so and to sort of riff on Justin's point, we're right now have already submitted everything for next year. And with the positions that we have or the positions we've requested, and I just don't think that at this point we feel that there's the need for someone, a full-time need for that position, which is when we, typically why, geotechnical services and wetland biologists, we just don't need them consistently enough to have someone on staff. Now, a bigger city may very well have that, but we're just not using those services frequently enough.
That addresses my question. Thank you, Lucy.
And for historical perspective also, I think the council made a budgetary decision a few years ago to even lose the arborist that was a long-term staff member in that area. So there are definitely budgetary considerations in that point.
And I have a question to address that as well. We do a lot of work interagency. Do we have shared resources we could leverage from, say, Bellevue or Redmond or Snoqualmie? We'd be able to fill that role for the temporary duration that we need them.
Well, I think, I don't know. So I'm making this up off the top of my head. I hadn't thought about that. I think the question is we would want someone who was familiar enough with our standards and our expectations to fulfill those responsibilities. It's an interesting question if another city, I will say that when we were looking for some additional planning resources, I did contact probably 10 different cities to see who they used. I have not done that for landscape services, and that would certainly be an appropriate thing to do, to find out if there is a consultant that they use and or if there's someone on staff they care to share. Most of the time, I know that we've shared building inspectors when one city's been slower and another city has been busier, but I'm not sure that typically cities share staff that way. But it's an interesting question we'll have to find out about.
There's going to be a lot of building going on, proposed building in the next 20 years. And if we ever get to a point where there is so much going on and there is a need for a specific arborist or landscape designer, I think at that time the city might look at it. But right now there is, unless I'm off, I don't think there's enough work for one person to maintain a salary on staff. So maybe in the future. Any questions from our illustrious Development Commission?
I would agree with you, Madam Chair. Just off the top of my head without statistics, but the pace at which the Development Commission has been meeting has certainly picked up in the last year, but it was much higher several years ago. Excuse me, before 2008, 2009. We were routinely having Development Commission meetings with 2 applications per meeting every month. and sometimes more than that. And we almost never have that now. It seems like there's a lot more development, but it is not, to your point about the need for specific disciplines on staff. What we're seeing is not as much demand for the services here as there was, and it seems hard to believe, but that is the case.
Lucy, are you next?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. You need all those papers?
I want to be prepared, but hopefully I won't need them. So I'm covering two different pieces. First one is a fairly significant rewrite of Chapter 14 in the Central Issaquah Standards. Chapter 14 is building design. There were several reasons that we determined that this was necessary. First of all, we wanted to make the standards easier to use. We discovered in using them that there were often things referenced in multiple locations. So in 5 different places, there were standards related to windows, and in 5 different places, there were standards related to entries. And it just made it hard for applicants and for staff to feel confident that they had gotten to all the standards that were applicable. We had gotten feedback from the commission, the council, and the public, as well as our own staff experience, that there were certain challenges in this chapter, and some desire that we had heard to provide more tools around design. And we considered these edits an interim step we have proposed to the council as part of the budget to look for outside resources to help us write more detailed architectural and building standards. But that will take well into next year. I mean, first of all, we have to see if we get the budget for next year, and then that work has to take place. So we're thinking that's at least a year or more out, and that there are a lot of building projects coming through. So we see this as a step to provide a better tool while we wait to develop a more final tool. So those were the 3 reasons why we took this step. The first thing I wanted to show you was just the overall structure and compare that. You can see that many of the same categories still exist, but we have regrouped them. We found that, you can see that, for instance, residential uses are in several places and standards for all uses are in several places. So we tried to group like with like and make that easier. One of the questions I had received was to be really clear about what things were either removed or replaced. So these seem like the 4. We didn't really remove very much. Mostly we replaced things or used a different tool, but we wanted to specifically identify these. One of them was there was a requirement that buildings with a footprint greater than 45,000 square feet be comprised of at least 2 masses. A footprint of 45,000 square feet is huge, and we were not seeing any buildings that met that requirement. And in thinking about it more, we could have said, if it was a building of 45,000 square feet, the whole building instead of just a footprint. But what we realized in some of the reviews that we have done with the commission was it was really the length of the building that was an issue more than the square footage of the building. So we moved to we've taken away the 45,000 square feet and replaced it with some requirements related to buildings over 50 feet in length. There was requirements related to benches and seat walls along 25% of the facade. This was sometimes just met with seat walls or planting areas, and we weren't finding that that was necessarily giving us the benefit that we were hoping. So we've taken that specific requirement out and added it as a treatment for blank walls, one of the options there. Consideration, what used to be required, it said, consider making rooftop accessible to the public. We just thought that was unlikely, and it was a consideration, and so we proposed to just remove that as a consideration. And finally, there's something called a solar reflectance index, which has to do with the color and materials that a roof. And there was a specific number in the Central Issaquah standards, and we had some confusion with one of the projects. And we realized in understanding that better that requirement was already addressed in the Issaquah Municipal Code. So we took that out. We didn't want to have any conflicts or confusion between those two. But we did put in a consideration based on the color, you know, if it's visible from above. With so many hills and people living on Squawk Mountain, we wanted to put that consideration in there. Some of the things that we added, we had these standards from Issaquah Highlands, and while those are not infallible, they have been used for a number of years. So we looked at those standards for things related to facades greater than 50 feet in length, the tripartite or 3 horizontal components of a building, techniques to emphasize and highlight entrances to buildings, materials and colors, and definitions and techniques to deal with blank walls. So we look to their standards to give us proven tools rather than trying to write or create our own. So, you know, this is many pages. I'm not going to go through all the specifics. I am certainly happy to answer questions. One thing we did receive was an email from the public identifying elements that they found confusing or that where they disagreed. So we took those under consideration and are proposing 7 changes to the standards in response to those public comments. Those were emailed out to you earlier today, but since many of you may not have seen that email, we're going to go through them tonight. That's the memo you have in front of you, so you can follow along if you're interested.
Quick question regarding
Sure.
the rooftop considerations. Where was that located specifically within the standards?
It was in the section on rooftops, which I believe is 14.6. Yes, so if you look, I think it's on page 20 of your packet, under 14.6A, it was number 3.
So my question is gearing towards that. Why is the consideration being removed? I mean, it seems as we get into more and more of these mixed-use buildings, rooftop deck access, rooftops used for either gathering spaces or for pea patches, or even on smaller developments such as restaurants are very common within Seattle. And as we grow and attract more of those type of restaurants and developments, it seems like that would be a consideration that you would want.
So the use of the rooftop, we weren't taking that out. But the use of the rooftop by the public, so making a rooftop generally available to the public, seemed unlikely, and if someone was interested and saw value in doing that, they seemed like they were likely to do it, whether it was in the code or not.
Okay.
So that's our rationale. Let us know.
If the building is residential, obviously it could be used for the residents of that building.
Absolutely.
But it would be hard to have somebody just decide to walk up and use the, sunbathe up in the roof. So I can see where there would be a difference in the necessity to put that in.
And I don't want to imply that we don't think that we think it would be great if the public was allowed to use the roof. And I agree with everything you said, Justin, that the rooftop should be available. It should be a resource either for sort of recreation or passive spaces for the residents or the employees, or a separate, even
Or
a
the
business.
customers. But yeah, I
Yeah.
see Joan's point that in an apartment complex, you don't necessarily want random people traipsing through your building.
Unless the builder specified in his original plans that he was going to put a piano bar up there.
Right,
So, if you knew when you bought the condo in the building, you would know that that's going to be up there.
right.
Okay. I would love to see that, actually.
Yes, I think we all agree.
Get to developing that, Joan.
So I'll start through the 7 changes that were identified in response to public comments. There were 2 pieces that have existed in the central Issaquah standards from the beginning. One is this, what architecturally we refer as tripartite construction or design. It has a base, a middle, and a top. And then there was also a piece related to above the 3rd floor, you either set the building back or you made changes in materials and colors and other articulation. And I think that we're still maintaining that, but we're not specifying that it has to happen at the above the 3rd floor, because that has been, we've found that kind of cumbersome. It doesn't really relate to the actual height of the building. If you have a 4-story building, that may look really odd to have that 4th floor have to be different than the rest of the building. That may not be the right place to make that a cap. So the techniques we think are the right techniques. We just didn't think that specifying the 3rd floor made sense. And the public comment that we had received said that the way we had tried to combine those 2 things was not helping it. It was making more confusion. So we decided to make this edit to try and eliminate the confusion. Okay. Number 2 had to do with views and solar access. I think that the public comment had to do specifically with views to and from certain buildings. I think we felt that we had spent a lot of time on views with PPC and the council in the last rounds of edits last year. So we wanted to specifically reference and link these 2 sections rather than introduce new view pieces. And in doing that, we separated solar access from views because we thought that it began to get too complicated having both of them in the same sentence. This was also the should and shall discussion that some of you may have seen. And so that was part of, you can see some of the edits are related to clarifying those word choices. Number 3 had to do, again, with should and shall. Also, there was a question of what is an adjacent use, so we added the word building because the point of this particular standard is that you shouldn't be setting buildings back unless the setback is going to be usable and make sense. And that reference was to adjacent uses, so we wanted to clarify what an adjacent use was. Number 4, there was some confusion about what overhead elements were. And in looking at that language, I think we recognize that, that relative to this on gates and fences and establishing semi-private or semi-public space, that overhead elements probably weren't that useful or relevant to that, so we eliminated that. And also clarified that it wasn't just where gates and fences are required, but even just if they're proposed. So that it's the same standard in either circumstance. Number 5 was a question about what was a proportional color. I think, so we recognized that this language was a little awkward, so we tried to add some additional language to clarify around colors, appropriate proportion, and the difference between coherent and sort of chaotic. Number 6 was around the concern around the word should, so we've made this required as opposed to optional. And then number 7 was again confusion about when we said except alleys, and then we started talking about pedestrians. It seemed like we were mixing things up. So we took the alleys out so that we're talking about the areas where you don't want blank walls in the first sentence, and then with alleys and blank walls, in what ways you can allow those.
That makes more sense.
Staff, in working through these, staff had identified one clarification that was related to windows. One was that we wanted windows not just facing streets, but also facing the public realm. The reason that's capitalized is public realm represents community spaces and circulation facilities. So basically the kinds of spaces that the public would be in. And we were concerned that the II, the last one that's been edited, that there could be some confusion about whether the things that we did not want appeared to be part of the 75% that was required to be clear. So we separated those into distinct sentences with the intent of clarifying that.
Any questions, comments? Go on.
I've got a
I do
few
have
different
one.
things, but I'll wait.
Yes.
Okay.
I have just one question. I mean, it seems a little unclear. I mean, for instance, small storefronts that have 2 large windows, but then they have one door panel window, or one of their windows has their decal, which may encompass more than 25%. It seems a little unclear that we're not talking overall percentage of windows versus each particular window. You see what I'm saying?
Well, actually, in our experience, so right now, in the sign code, and I'm not even going to go in, the Supreme Court did a ruling on sign codes nationally last year, and we're going to have to undertake that. So that's part of why we're putting this in here. But currently in the sign code, you're actually limited to a different percentage. And the way we have applied that is to that we look at all the windows, because there may be a reason based on activities inside that you want one window that has your film on it for, you know, we've had stores where they are counting their money and doing their business, and they do not want any visibility into that room, but all the rest of the windows could be clear. So that's why we're not doing it on a window-by-window basis, but rather allowing them to do it on a facade basis.
So going to that point, I mean, say you have, throw out a hypothetical.
Sure.
A CIA facility where they need every window blacked out. Does this provide for an exception?
Yes, I believe that, let me just, I want to get the exact reference for you. Okay, so it says, the next one, I, says, this may be reviewed by the director on a case-by-case basis when the security and privacy requirements of the tenant need to be balanced with the character of the circulation facility. So if, that's on page 17 of 41. That's up near the top under F. No, the top, the very top of the page, I, which would be under D.
And my only, concern still on that realm would be to put current section 4 above current section 3 and allow the director to make a case-by-case basis on those kind of issues as well. Again, hypothetical of the CIA coming in. I always throw that out because that's the most secure thing I can think of.
Yeah,
right?
no, fair enough. Are you concerned that by,
just construction, it would seem that would not be something that would be within the director's purvey to exempt if it sat below that exception.
All right, so why don't we look at where we're putting it or adding language to clarify that the intent is all of the things in section D apply to that?
Even just adding words, anything within this section D may be reviewed.
Okay.
Lucy, I found the wording regarding building colors, building design, to be a little ambiguous. I felt it to actually continue to create this concept of what we want without saying what we want, which we can kind of get into trouble for. I didn't know that this section actually achieved adding the word hodgepodge, though I love the word. I didn't feel like it. I appreciate your concept of this quilt-like concept of being a lot of different things in one, but I also didn't feel like it necessarily helped with building color. And I was curious, I'm assuming that our legal staff has looked through it and that they found that this satisfied any requirements that we have.
No, we have not sent this particular section to the city attorney yet. I'll be frank, the color section is the very, very hardest one. There are certain things that are very clear and very easy to say. I'm not sure that there is a consensus exactly on how to handle color, which is why we're looking forward to having a consultant next year to help us address that. I think the question for you is whether you're asking or recommending that F not be included.
Or that it be clarified further whether that, however legally we're able to say these are the things that we approve of, that we suggest, but by not giving people these more clear definitions, I feel like we start to get into a loop of not quite right, go back, not quite right, and that's what I was a little concerned of, specifically regarding the color.
Right.
So I didn't know how.
And this is a new thing for our staff because we have typically had either a very specific palette in certain parts of town or an architectural review committee in other parts of town. And we're frankly dipping our toe in and trying to, as I said, provide some guidance to get us through the next period of time until we have worked through on a more thorough, I'm not sure quite what the right adjective is, but
Do you mind if I throw something
Please.
in on this? So, first of all, I have a suggestion of one change to the verbiage because I didn't really understand appropriate proportion, and I thought it might be better to say color palette should be appropriate for the material specified, so forth, if that's what we're. So your new revision where it says the color palette for any one building should be an appropriate proportion to, with color, I don't think of proportions, but I thought if it said should be appropriate for.
Okay.
And then I guess my experience from the Development Commission is I actually like this language because it would give us something to hang our hat on. If they do come in with a color palette and say, here are the 4 or 5 colors we're using, we can opine on it and say, we don't think that's appropriate for, we could actually use that verbiage, it's not appropriate for this. And I think developers typically are fairly flexible on color at that stage because it's not a big cost item. You know, if it's an architect saying, I really want to have this kind of color scheme, the developers will say, look, if it gets me approved to do a different color pattern, I'll do it. So I kind of like the language from a usability.
That's great feedback.
We actually had a problem with color.
Yes. But I'm not eager to step into that yet. I think there's been a lot, and I'm sorry for laughing, it's just I've gotten a million phone calls around the Atlas project at 7th and Gilman. There's a lot of discussion about the blue, and we've spent quite a bit of time in the field looking at that with various city officials. I think that it has been, I think some of the questions are not just around the color, but also what part of the building the color is on and how visible it is from other places. And so I think that color has been an issue. I just think we're not, because we haven't regulated it at this point, we are hesitant, or in this way, we are hesitant to try and really dial this down in a very specific way without more professional expertise about what has withstood legal challenges, what has been manageable by staff and commissions to actually apply. I think that's been one of the concerns. The original Central Issaquah plan standards avoided discussion of color. We just thought that it was too difficult to regulate. I think because of the extent of comments we've received, we feel, and I think a desire on the part of the commission to have better tools, we're willing to begin that discussion, but we really feel like to complete it, we're going to need a different set of resources than what staff can bring to the topic.
And Lucy, I may be the only one that wasn't aware of this, but in the training that we had not long ago, it was brought up, and I believe you also referred to it. There was a U.S. Supreme Court decision involving the city of Issaquah. And I believe, as I recall it, that it got all the way up to the Supreme Court because I think it was the Development Commission at the time, had told the applicant that the color was unacceptable. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? And the Development Commission basically responded, we'll know it when we see it. And I think Lucy said that at national conventions now, people will say, is there anybody here from Issaquah? Can you tell us about your stand? Because it did get all the way up there. So it's an extremely challenging issue, I think, for everybody. It gets discussed at that level.
So the original requirements for the downtown area said anything you build in the future will be similar to what's already there. Now that, didn't give anybody any direction whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, so with the background of that case, I mean, I would have some similar issues with hodgepodge being unconstitutionally vague, and that would be a major concern that it may expose us to more litigation. It would be one where I'd almost rather leave it out rather than face another court challenge until we have something that's more properly vetted, and that would be my recommendation on that particular portion.
Well, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to have a conversation with the city attorney. I mean, coming out of this, we'll have a month or so before we're at Land and Shore, so we'll have an opportunity to have a conversation with the city attorney and see if he has recommendations on language or whether this should be delayed until we get to more detailed standards working with a consultant.
Yeah, so as long as it goes through that vetting process,
Okay.
I'd be comfortable with it.
Great.
And I would say again too, though, we really like to have the tools of the language that we can use. And again, I don't think any developer is ever going to sue the city, go to that step in order to get their color palette for their building. It would never make any financial sense to do that. If we said, look, change these colors to this, they would say, great, we'll do that, rather than fight it that much. And it would really be nice to have this kind of language to hang our hat on, even if it's not constitutionally defendable.
Well, we'll do our best.
Yeah.
I think maybe also adding the director's oversight for case-by-case exceptions would be appropriate too. Or would that not fly legally?
I think that'd be, exceptions are always fine. As far as case by case, I don't think you could allow a director to case by case overrule without a standard. As far as, one of the ways this could be pegged is to use some sort of complementary color palette system, and then also include languages to keep the languages to the consistent with the nature of the surrounding developments, so that there is some color that you can peg it off of. So that if you have a blue coming up against buildings that are traditionally brick red, you could look at that and say, well, that's not complementary to the nature of it. It ends up being outside of it. So maybe pegging it to some existing color palette, complementary color scheme.
I think one of the challenges, I think that's a good, and I completely appreciate where you're trying to go with it. I think one of the challenges with trying to peg it to existing things is, as the city's transitioning, where we've been may not be where we want to be. So it is always a challenge trying to figure out what that threshold or milestone is, or landmark that we're using. And I'm not sure, generally, if you're reasonable and you're trying to find a solution, a win-win solution, you don't end up in court. But that, we're not interested in standing up with a big red flag and getting ourselves in trouble. So I think what we should do is while trying to create tools to use in the interim to support staff and the Development Commission, check in to see if this is so vague that it will present challenges, and to determine if there are language or examples that that the city attorney would recommend along in the vein of what you're suggesting, Justin.
So after you go to rivers and streams, what's the process after that? When
So
does
it's
it
actually Land and Shore.
Land and Shore?
That's okay. So Land and Shore is a council committee. This package comes out, assuming that you recommend it be moved forward. It goes to the full council, who just refers it to Land and Shore. At Land and Shore, staff make a similar presentation. We include some of the information on the kinds of comments that you've provided. We continue to discuss that with the council committee, and then they would make a recommendation to the full council.
Time frame.
Oh, time frame. I'm sorry. I think we're looking at September.
It's the last slide.
So the first thing to look at, Land and Shore, is in a week, 2 weeks? Okay.
August 4th.
July the 18th.
Is the full council referring it to the council committee? August 4 would be the council committee, and then potentially back to the council for action on September 19th. Sometimes they come back more than once to Land and Shore, depending on the kinds of questions and work that staff needs to do to respond to the council.
When is the next PPC meeting?
I need a calendar. July, be the 2nd and 4th of July.
So we will have a
4, 5,
PPC meeting.
7,
before
11.
it goes to Land and Shore.
July 11 would be the second Thursday.
Okay.
No, or is it the 14th and the 28th of July?
Yeah, see how much good my math did.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can't picture what July looks like, the 14th and 28th.
Okay, so there's time for you to do a little bit more discussion and talk to the attorney and get some, maybe see if there's a little bit better language. So we'd still have the opportunity to vote on approval of this before it goes to them, or does it have to be done tonight?
Well, we couldn't move it on this schedule if you weren't done with it tonight. If we had to come back here, that would bump the whole thing a little bit.
So it's really, I don't think we're trying to apply pressure to the commission. Sometimes you feel like, I think you have a sense of the changes we're going to make and you're comfortable forwarding it and you aren't seeing the exact words. And sometimes you want to see the exact words and we bring it back to you. And that's a decision that you can make at the end of the evening based on the, the sense of the commission.
Well, I don't think we've had any real problems with anything. It's just that, we don't have a definitive answer on this for Justin to be comfortable with. So you can forward it with that caveat of having further discussion based on that.
Sure.
Is all I was getting at.
Right.
So that on July 11th, if you have come up with anything, we can discuss that little bit of.
And provide additional information to
Yeah,
the.
just on that one little.
Sure,
That's all I'm getting at.
Right.
I also have another suggestion that might be helpful. Why don't we leverage maybe the Arts Commission to be able to look at some more bolder colors, like, let's take the Atlas. If the developer came forward and said, I want to paint my building this color blue and build the Atlas project as it is, it may not fall into the standard schemes that we want to come up with. So it could go on to an Arts Commission who could then look at it at the whole and determine, does it fit the surroundings? Does it comply with the landscape that we have, the mountainscape, the trees, all those different kinds of things? They can look at that and they can make the evaluation and make it allowed to go forward. Because I like the fact that we allow for uniqueness in colors and bold aspects. That kind of makes Issaquah nice. At the same time, I don't want someone to come in with a fluorescent green building either. So I think having that oversight and using their expertise, and they like what they do and they're very talented at it. So I think that'd be a great idea to bring in another commission.
And absolutely, other commissions can be involved. We still have to have an adopted standard that they're using as the basis as opposed to their personal opinion. From a land use perspective, it's part of sort of the case law that decisions have to be based on standards that anyone can identify. So Arts Commission could be involved, but we would still need criteria or a basis with which they were reviewing against, or that if staff was, or a separate third party was reviewing, we still have to have a criteria or standard.
And that's the criteria, the same criteria that the Development Commission uses.
Right.
So I don't know what the, I certainly understand your suggestion, but the standards that you folks are going to come up with, the changes, are the ones that we'll be using to make our decisions and recommendations at the DC. So.
And that would be the same as the Arts Commission. I mean, they need a basis to
Yeah, it's got to be the
make
same.
a decision on, yeah.
It sounds like we need to have a collaborative discussion with you.
I'm sorry?
We need to have a collaborative discussion with you.
I think that's what we're doing.
Well, you have development, you have planning, and you have art right here, so.
Lucy, I got just a quick question
Sure.
that not related to color.
Thank you.
Where did 13 feet come from in regards to the separation between buildings? Is that a standard, or is that something that's always been there, or?
I think it's based on the width of the facility, the through-block passage, and the landscape that would be provided on either side of it. And so the total number was the basis, adding up those pieces.
13 seems so, 13.
Would you like it to be 14?
I'd like it to be 15. It just, I just didn't understand, I just was curious of where the 13 came from. That it seemed to be a basis, unless it's a standard that is based on sidewalk widths are 6 feet and planting widths are 3.5
Right.
on each side. Or,
Right.
you know, that's what the international business or building standard codes are.
Well, okay, now I'm standing here and I'm thinking, a through-block passage is 10 feet wide, and I think that it requires 2 feet on either side. My trusty sidekick here.
Sidekick. Oh, she's a psychic sidekick.
She is psychic.
Oh, it's the secondary, Lucy, 5 and 4 and 4.
Oh. That would be,
Doesn't Carol get?
no, you're right. So a secondary through-block passage is 5-foot walkway and 4 feet of landscape on either side, which adds up to 13. So that was where the number 13 came from. Whew.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have a couple questions, if it's okay, jump in. I guess one quick comment too, the tripartite building idea, I very much like the idea of getting rid of that 3 floors and so forth. I would like that sort of reconsidered over time too, as we see buildings come through and necessitating tripartite every time. I'm not sure we need, but on item 2, 14.3A3 on building mass, it talks about analysis of solar impact from tall buildings used as a factor in determining the placement of the tall portions of buildings. And I was trying to figure out what is tall.
I knew someone was going to ask that question. I looked at the definitions. There have been, in some of the development agreements, we have defined those terms. It isn't defined in this one. I just wanted to double check. Let's see, 4A3. Can you do me a favor and look, see if you can figure out the original source of that? Was it in the general standards? I just wanted to see if the language was changed at all. So I'm looking at the original language, used the word taller. So I think that we stuck with our terminology. We did not define it. That could be something that we could do. I believe in the Rowley Development Agreement, which was sort of the springboard from which many of the standards here, I think that may have been like over 8 or 9 stories. But because we haven't defined that in Central Issaquah, I think we didn't define it here.
Maybe something in the future to look into and.
Right.
Figure out, yeah. Another question on 14.4, A1, the continuous street wall shall be provided. I want to make sure, is that the issue we had with the Costco corner and the buildings coming out to the sidewalk, is that is that under site design, not building wall design? So this would be a separate issue, I mean, a continuous street wall? Or would this require you to go all the way out to that corner?
So there, in Chapter 11, which is site, you're correct, there are several, like maybe 5 provisions that relate to street walls. So the first is, depending on which zone it is, it specifies the percentage of the frontage that needs to be occupied by a building. And then for where there isn't a building, it defines where techniques and tools for establishing a street wall that isn't a building. So that might be architectural elements or some kind of fence or wall. However, You might remember that last year around views, circulation facilities and significant community spaces were identified as the important views to preserve. And to take the Costco example as kind of a lessons learned, where streets are curvilinear, we committed that we would upfront through an AAS, Administrative Adjustment of Standards, identify which views were important upfront so that then we could work the plan around that, because obviously on a curvilinear road, it is an ever-changing vista.
So that can still trump this language then?
Sure. Can you show me just where you are to make sure I am?
Oh, it was in, it wasn't in the list of 7, it was in the building design and ground level details,
Okay.
14.4A1.
Okay,
Page 25 of 51.
thank you.
15 of 41 in your map.
25 or 51.
So what I would say, Mel, is that on a straight street, that wouldn't be an issue. And on a curvilinear street, we would have to identify if there was, if we needed to, for instance, adjust street tree spacing or other kinds of street wall elements to ensure that that vista was preserved.
Great, and that site, great, okay. And then on building materials, 7B. It says concrete blocks shall have complementary mortar colors, and I was trying to figure out, does that mean complementary to the building or to the block itself?
I would have assumed that that was the block itself.
Okay. And then on 8, building colors, E, color blocking is permitted. I'm not familiar with the term.
Okay. So, and, you know, I wondered about that today because part of the reason we put this in is color blocking was not allowed in the Issaquah Highlands standards, and we felt it was a good tool. So, and I apologize that I didn't anticipate this. I'm just going to, this is how, when we had this conversation, I love typing in front of lots of people. Not clothing. So I'm not recommending any of these, but color blocking is a technique in which you find panels. So it adds a certain level of interest in detail where you may not change the material at all. It is probably, you see this one here, that's, I'm not recommending that we do this, although I'd like it. But it is a very cost-effective way to add interest and scale to a building. So we wanted to be clear that that was one of several tools, but you'll notice where you have a blank wall or where we're talking about surface detailing, that would not be sufficient to address the standards that we've written in other parts of this section.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I also have it sounds like they finished. I have a couple questions also about building materials. 7A, sturdy quality materials will be used. Other reflective materials may be used in limited quantities, that's fine. Sturdy quality materials will be used. How about sturdy, long-lasting, all-weather materials? The reason why I bring that up, I went for a walk the other day up in Highlands, and I noticed that along the sidewalk, many buildings that have fiber board is disintegrating. And moving forward, that's not necessarily a building material that I would recommend we do in mass quantities, one, because the maintenance behind it, but also because it disintegrates very rapidly, and if we're in a high-density situation, we have many buildings starting to rapidly deteriorate, it's going to really bring down the neighborhood and bring down the
Right, and it's not, I mean, from a sustainability perspective, that's not what we're looking for either. The one, and I appreciate your language, I think that's a good addition. One of my questions would be, is it the detailing of the material or the actual material? Because Hardy, if that's what you mean, like the cement paneling.
No, that's good.
Okay.
What I saw was actually fiberboard, painted fiberboard.
Huh. I'll want to hear where that is, so that
And it's delaminating, and it's, you can actually see the paper fibers behind it.
Okay,
I think
okay.
I can show you where it is.
Okay, I have an
offline.
idea where it might be, so thank you for pointing that out.
That's.
No, I
and
think
maybe
that's a good addition.
Putting that in 7D, the following materials are prohibited: corrugated fiberglass, T111, backlit awnings, maybe composition wood. I think that's what they would call that.
Okay, well, that's where, knowing where you're, the example you're thinking of and being able to ensure that we're referring to it properly.
Yeah, okay. I can show you the details offline
Great,
where that is located.
thank you.
Anything else?
I have a question, Madam Chair, for you and Lucy. It goes back to the tall. I just want to make sure that I understand what the rationale is for, as I understand it, let me just put it this way. As I understand it, there is not now a definition of tall.
There is not.
I don't presume to speak for the other members of the Development Commission, but that seems to me to be something that might benefit from some more detail as to what is tall. I mean, it's beauty in the eye of the beholder, and it just seems.
You have to quantify it.
Yeah. I would suggest that that's something that it just seems to me could use some greater definition. It seems like arbitrary. Yeah.
You would like a height
Well,
or
you know,
taller than other buildings around it? What would you?
I don't know. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't, it just seems to me that the word tall leaves it up to the individual to decide what's tall and what's not.
Is high-rise defined? We mentioned it when we're discussing, I'm sorry, what section are we in?
So that was just pointed out, so I'm looking that up.
It's under structure.
Right.
I'm on page 26 of 41.
So, low-rise is up to 4 stories, mid-rise is from 5 to 9 stories, and high-rise are typically 10 stories or more.
And in looking at the definition of taller, you mentioned beauty's in the eye of the beholder somewhat. I mean, if you have a taller building going in next to a shorter building, but that taller building is blocking 90% of the light across that entire property, I think that might qualify as taller for that other property. And so it may be something where you have to look at either maximum height or provide a definition of solar where it's blocking a certain amount of sunlight in an adjacent property. That may be 2 ways to look at it.
Or percentage of the adjacent buildings.
Yeah.
So again, I think one of the challenges is during this transitional period, the goal is to accommodate a certain amount of density that the city has committed to taking. So the question becomes, if it prohibited someone building anything on their adjacent property, I think the city could be sued for a taking. So I think that if the, I appreciate the point that the commission's making, and I would recommend that the word tall be substituted with either mid-rise or high-rise, because those are defined terms.
I'd be comfortable with mid-rise, I think, at that point, just in terms of.
Or above?
Mid-rise or above, exactly.
I like that. Good. Then you quantify it with a standard, at least.
If you actually said analysis of solar impacts from mid-rise and high-rise buildings, use as a factor, do and. In determining the placement of the mid-rise, of the portion above X stories. The X stories would be what low-rise goes to? Was that 4 or 5 floors?
I'm not sure, I forget the exact definition of mid-rise, but it would encompass everything above the low-rise standards.
Yeah, because Lucy, you said, was it 5 to,
Mid-rise is
5 to
5 to
9.
9.
yeah.
High
So that would get
high-rise
5
is
and
10
higher.
above.
And then any impacts, placement of the portions above 4 stories. So that would capture your 5 and above. That make sense?
You're putting them together?
So what I have right now is that the second sentence, tall buildings also impact solar access. Analysis of solar impacts from mid and high-rise buildings will be used as a factor in determining the placement of the portions of buildings above 4 stories.
Yeah, and I would add a couple words to that.
Okay.
Adverse solar impacts. I think if you're providing, there's obviously always going to be solar impacts of some sort. And then I would also add analysis of adverse solar impacts and mitigation efforts. If there's something that they can do to add reflective light back into the property that they're affecting, really what is the impact?
Okay, I've got that.
Thank you.
I have a question here for our committee here on B3, 14.3B3. It states, I'll wait till people get to it. On page 24, bottom. This is new language that was added. Provide setbacks for commercial and retail uses only if the adjacent uses are likely to use them or they are necessary for security purposes such as offices. So, in the situation of that, what is considered likely is not quantified, just likely. 2, if it's a mixed-use environment, shouldn't we protect the setback? Because we don't know what's going to move in, if it's going to be a cafe, maybe a bike shop, hiking shop, some other type of retail that may actually want to use the sidewalk for sales or eating or other types of commerce. If we leave it as likely, and we're really leaving it up to the developer, and that may not be the best action to take. What's some opinions?
Could I just clarify one thing? And I apologize that we didn't say this up front, but and I don't know if you can tell this in the copy that you have, but when it's double underline and green, that means that it was relocated from one part of the chapter to another. So it's new in this location, but it is not new text.
Ah, okay.
So we didn't give you the decoder ring up front. Sorry about that.
All right, I just assumed it was,
Completely
Go on,
understandable. Completely understandable.
while we're at it, do we want to discuss it? Or am I the only one?
I'm always of two minds about setbacks for these kind of uses. On the one hand, you do have to provide for the greater density, and putting a setback that may never be used removes that ability, or forcing a developer to use it when they don't necessarily want to. I think the developers are going to be in the best place to determine whether there's going to be a need for a potential setback for those kind of uses. So in that respect, I think I'm fine with the language as is, personally.
And I guess question, Lucy, that would be something a developer would come in, look for this exemption in the staff report, you would opine on it to the Development Commission, then we would have to believe that it's going to be likely that there is.
And that's an interesting point, Mel, because there are essentially 4 different tests. There's, the developer is going to propose something, the staff is going to review it, the commission is going to look at it, and the public is going to look at it. There is a maximum setback. So in every zone, there is a maximum amount that they could set back to begin with. And the question is, do you set back the full amount or just a portion or none? And I would say that it is probably more common that we get some setback than we get no setback, but not in all cases. I mean, I can think of projects that have come before the Development Commission in which there is no setback.
And has that been a problem for us?
I don't think that it is a problem. I think what we don't want is that, I think our concern is that typically in a suburban approach, you would always have a setback, and more setback is better. And so what we want is to use our land thoughtfully and efficiently. If there is an opportunity for it to be used and make sense in just the way you've described, where we're setting it up to serve potential uses, and the ground floor is designed for retail, and therefore we're likely to have, it's not unreasonable to think that some of those uses would take advantage of it in the very ways you've described, that would be great. I think if someone is coming in with a medical, I'm going to use your CIA example, but you know, a server farm, a CIA facility, they're never going to have, they're never going to have their windows open, they're never going to use any of that space, then we would question, why are we setting back there? Now, there might be security or privacy reasons, and that's the kind of conversation that we have, and that's what this is intended to guide, is those kind of conversations.
Okay. I just want to ensure that retail space for public is protected in these cases. So, but what I've heard so far sound like great arguments, so
Okay.
move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it'll come as a case-by-case situation, and what kind of building they're gonna, you're not gonna limit the development, and if the developer wants to build use the building for a specific purpose, you're gonna have to go with that. Anything else?
I do have one more. This is for section BB, which is the top of page 23 of our packets, or page 13 of the suggested agenda items. Developments should implement the most effective and innovative sustainable green building program measures. Furthermore, developments should build from the experience of local and regional sustainable developments, including Issaquah Project, Z-Home, and Fire Station 72. Sustainable building design should also address other sustainable aspects, such as low-impact development conduit for fiber, broadband, readiness, and project power minimization. Instead of should, shouldn't that be shall?
So we had a lot of discussion about this today because we had done that evaluation of every should and shall in this chapter. And here's our hesitation is, there are building code requirements. There are optional sections of the building code related to sustainability that the city has adopted. Those are addressed through other regulations. The piece that is related to this is not generally reviewed by Development Services staff. What we're trying to do is encourage someone to do these things. And we had thought about identifying that, that they potentially shall work with the Office of Sustainability because they have much more technical expertise. Our concern is that if someone proposes something, I can't say it is the most effective and innovative. I'm not sure any of the staff in Development Services would be expert enough to evaluate the choices that were being proposed. So while we completely concur with the motivation that you're identifying, because that is the city's vision and policy for itself, I think that the way we viewed this particular provision is that it's indicating those values, but that we're relying on other sections of the code to implement that until such time, for instance, that the Office of Sustainability adopts mandatory provisions beyond what the building code or the state energy codes require.
Is there the potential then to put a shall consult with Office of Sustainability to identify potential projects, meaning that they're at least forced to look and see and ask and see what could we do to make this project better, even if they don't necessarily implement it? I mean, if the Office of Sustainability can make a business case to them that, hey, if you do these projects, you're going to result in long-term cost savings and these impacts that are going to be good for you as a business level, you're opening that conversation, I think, a little bit more, even if you're not mandating the project itself.
And I'll tell you, my only hesitation is I have no sense of their staffing and whether they are prepared to have to talk with every applicant. And so I would like to have a conversation with them before I commit them to having to talk with every applicant.
And that may be something, too, where we make those conversations happen only on projects above certain square footages.
Right, that's true.
And that way, that could limit it to those available resources, which wouldn't overtax them.
Right, right.
Lucy, do you have additions?
So the only last thing was there were, and I'm not sure that we need to discuss them, but I just wanted to get them on on the commission's radar. As you may be aware, the track changes were very extensive in this chapter, and when we began accepting them, we found some typos and errors. So there are 6 of those which were in your memo. They do not change content. They either restore something that was accidentally deleted or delete something that was accidentally left in or correct a spelling or a awkward word. I don't think there's anything to discuss, but we just wanted to be overt about those changes coming. Okay. So the last one has to do with motorcycle parking spaces. Since Central Issaquah was adopted, there has been a requirement for a certain amount of motorcycle parking to be provided based on the number of automobile parking spaces that were provided. What we inadvertently left out was 2 provisions that have been in several development agreements where we had done research on this. One was the size of the spaces, and the second was credit. If you provide motorcycle parking, you get a small credit towards your required automobile parking. We have not seen anyone take that so far. It is at the option of the developer. Down at the bottom, you can see I ran through a hypothetical and an actual project just to show you that it might result in, say, even at Gateway, where there were almost 700 parking spaces, it might result in 4 or 5 parking spaces being removed if that credit was given.
My only comment on the motorcycle stall size is I've seen several developments use a large multi-stall that can accommodate several bikes, and I think the code should allow for that aspect. You know, if you have a 16-foot by 8-foot stall that can accommodate 4 bikes, it should be proportional and count as 4 stalls rather than forcing them to mark off a bunch of separate stalls. Just a lot of places have a motorcycle parking area.
My hesitancy is how that doesn't end up being used as a parking stall for vehicles, which was part of the concern, part of the push that we had received from the Urban Village Development Commission, was that motorcycle riders are hesitant to take a full car space. And so I wonder how we, simply labeling it is probably not enough to protect it if it does fit a full-size vehicle.
That's actually how I've seen it, is labeled as motorcycle parking or offset in a different color paint so that it's clearly labeled as motorcycle parking only.
Okay.
You know, yellow paint primarily is how I've seen that labeled.
So would it be sufficient to simply reference that, an applicant could propose combining some number of their motorcycle parking spaces into a combined motorcycle parking space?
Yeah.
And it would be
combined,
reviewed on a
clearly labeled.
case-by-case basis?
Yeah, I think that'd be fine.
Okay,
yeah.
that would be great.
And that way the director could address any labeling concerns.
Right, and the other thing I'm concerned about is just where it's located. You know, if it's, motorcycle parking tends to be in sort of little leftover pieces, which is some of the value of it, because without requiring it, people often won't create them. They'll just make bigger car parking spaces, and then we're back to a motorcycle taking a full-size car space. And at the same time, I don't want those leftover spaces to be someplace where it would be very difficult to get a motorcycle in and out of, you know, say, in between 2 cars and 2 walls where you would never be able to get there. So I like that idea. Thank you. Anything else? That's it.
So at this time, I'm going to open up to anybody here that would like to make a public comment.
See, I did read all that.
Hey, my name's Connie Marsh, and I have a store at 1175 Northwest Gilman Boulevard, Suite B11, and I live here. And I thought staff did an awesome job of responding to public comment and going through the shells and mites and woods and all of that, because that's actually the first time I had ever read through code, just highlighting the words and looking at the hierarchy of language specifically. And it oddly made it way easier to read how it might function. And so I may do it all the time from now on, just because then I can read code and see better what might happen when it goes to be enforced. So I liked the majority of the language. I liked giving Development Commission some tools where they can explain to the developer why they don't like something right now. They can say, well, the color spectrum is not our preference, and then they just have to let it waft into the distance because everything becomes personal opinion, and personal opinion is not enforceable, even though it might be legitimate. And so even if it might not be perfect language, it is language that, for the moment, is enough to at least give them enough force behind their words to potentially make something better and create a community conversation about the context of a building within the community. And that has been lacking so far, not because people didn't want to do it, but the tools were not available. So for the most part, I think the tools I see included, especially with some of the changes, will help. Not perfect, but but they will help. Now, of course, because I'm a whiner, I disagree with the fact that the landscape code works. I think we just are in the habit of giving the bond back, whether the plants are surviving or not. I've never seen the bond withheld, but I actually very rarely actually see the plants survive. So I think that needs to change. Creating a plan that has 85% coverage in the plan and then expecting the coverage to be there in 3 years is sort of an impossible standard, because when you read the landscape plan, they have a survivability, they have a coverage, they have these places where they have to measure, and it's very detailed. And so I think there needs to be some more accurate language involved in those so that we can actually get mature, big things planted. Right now, we have a lot of smaller deciduous trees and shore pines in our town, which don't make Issaquah look like Issaquah, they make it look like Indiana, especially in the wintertime. And this may be one of the reasons for that limited planting palette that we see going in all of the time. Color. Now, I don't know if you remember the past, we had like 4 colors in Old Town, and you see a lot of them. You had blue, and I think you had green, and then I think you had sort of a bricky pink color. So it would be a fascinating public gathering to see what colors and architectural styles the city of Issaquah thinks its identity is. Because clearly with Atlas, people are flipping their gourds over that blue, and they're flipping their gourds over the modernism of the building with sort of unrelieved decoration. When it went through Development Commission, it looked just about like that, and it got passed through, and now it looks pretty stark, especially the color combinations. But what could they have said and done to change it? How do you describe what it is the people of the city of Issaquah want in their architecture? And how do you make it just so totally, not make it so traditional you die of boredom, right? But not so whimsical that you feel like you're in Eugene and we should have a pot store every 30 feet instead of every 300 feet, right? Because I don't want to go through marijuana again that soon. But I think that's a public discussion, and the city has not really had a discussion of that sort, and I think it would be interesting involving the Arts Commission, the Development Commission, because I think people at this moment are interested. Who would do that? I don't know. So. The director's changes, I don't even know what that means. I don't know who the director is, whether the director can designate that to someone else, and how those changes are tracked so that anyone would ever know that those changes were authorized. I don't know whether those changes would then be able to be called upon to be used in other situations and other proposals. So we do have the administrative adjustment of standards process, and it does seem like you need to legitimize some of those changes through a more structured and public process. Doesn't necessarily need to be onerous, but if every other thing is, oh, and the director can change it, they can change almost anything. But how and why and what exact criteria did they use? Because we may hate that. In the end, yet we will have no say or control nor visibility. And I was thinking maybe inviting the sustainability department to the pre-app meetings for some of the larger projects would be a reasonably low impact way for them to discuss with developers their ideas for sustainable and green housing that wouldn't be a budget hit or a time suck, but would at least begin the conversation. Because you get Mary Jo there all delighted and talking gibberish that I'm sure she knows what she's saying might just light their fires. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Connie. As usual, good comments. Anybody else want to? Does anybody else want to do any public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment and open it up to you guys if there's anything else that you want to discuss. Right now, we have a list of changes in the amendments. We've discussed 6 or 7 of them and made changes that you all seem to agree with. Most of them aren't major. They're more clarification than changing anything. But I think staff is willing to make those changes to help the Development Commission and make it more reasonable. I think that no matter what we do tonight, a year from now, someone's going to realize that, no, this doesn't work, and we're going to have to come back and change it again. I mean, that's just the process that it's ongoing. So we have to vote on this tonight, and I would propose that somebody, not me, would make a motion to forward this to the next person, next organization that looks at this, Land and Shore or whatever, and
Yeah.
based on, with the caveats that all of the things that we just discussed will be changed when it goes forward.
Yeah, I would make a motion to forward as amended tonight with comments and with the express caveat as to section 14.4A.8 building colors that we expressed
Yes.
on the record.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the amendment, the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So, you understand what the motion is with all of those. And it would be nice on July 11th, you don't have to come back and make a presentation, but just to give us the feeling that the things that we talked about were indeed included in the revisions that you're going to make to the amendment.
Absolutely, I think it's a great idea, just in the same way that we've been sending things to the Development Commission when we send them to you. I think it's great to send it to you when we're sending it to the council.
No, we haven't been invited to the Development Commission.
Come along, come on.
Madam Chair, I would like to just say on the record that the assumption on my part was that, as was the case here, we weren't specifically invited, but we were told that this was going to happen. We've been talking with staff for a long time about how good an idea this would be to give us a chance to at least sit in the audience and hear how the proposed changes are discussed and what they are. And I personally would invite all of you, alternates and so on, to come to any
I know
Development
that.
Commission meeting.
I know, but-
But I want to specifically say, this has been an extremely good experience for me, and I hope this is not unprecedented. For us to be able to come here and not only observe how the Planning Policy Commission works, but to be able to actually participate and comment on some of this is, to me, it's a heck of an opportunity for us, and I very much appreciate being given that opportunity.
I can say I definitely appreciate the different perspective and the input that you gave tonight. It was really helpful.
Great, thank you. And I have to, it's been interesting to make comments down there, but to be up here and be able to ask questions, really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, and I had a long conversation with the Chair of Land and Shore, and I think the kind of conversations that you had tonight are the kind of thing that will be really useful to them when these proposals come forward. So I think it will be very much appreciated by the council as well.
And riffing off what Randy said, when DC looks at their next Central Issaquah project, that will be one of your trainings, is to actually be there, or else watch it on TV if you're not available that night, to see what they do with the code that we all work with and change and think about, and to see how it actually lives and breathes when a project and an applicant come before them, and how they have to explain and talk about it, because I think that'd be fabulous training for all of us.
I've listened to them, I've watched them, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the detail and the time that it takes. So I know that they all do a good job. And
We just depend on Carl to do everything.
Carl has to be there no matter what, right?
And I assume-
I'm an alternate now, I don't have to do that.
And I assume that you get the same kinds of questions privately, or, you know, when you're walking on the street, or whatever, that the members of the Development Commission do. And frankly, I'm going to use this in further discussions with citizens about what's going on and how is this going on and so on. I'm going to use this as an example of how the process in uppercase is improving here, because this to me is really a great precedent.
Well, we're all members of the community, and we, you know, see the same things that everybody else does. And this is 7 or 8 people that are tuned in to what's going on and willing to make some comment, make some contribution. And we are thinking about what the rest of the community thinks about. So all of us are, you know, thank you for all of you. But now that we've done this kumbaya kind of thing, if there's anything else that, Trish, do you have anything else? Okay, with that, we will call the meeting to close at 8:26. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
Made the mistake.
Really like
This
the
whole thing.
cross-functional collaboration.